say that has Bay Hill officials scrambling? Why are other top players suddenly speaking out in support? And how did one withdrawal turn into the biggest crisis the PGA Tour has faced this entire season? Let's be brutally honest about what just happened at Bay Hill Club and Lodge, because the surface story doesn't even come close to capturing how devastating this is for the tournament and the tour. Rory McIlroy, a four-time major champion and one of the PGA Tour's most prominent voices, withdrew from the Arnold Palmer Invitational after just one round. Not because of injury, not because of personal emergency. He withdrew because he believes the course setup is so unfair, so excessively punishing, that continuing to play would be pointless and damaging to his mental game heading into next week's Players' Championship. That decision alone would be shocking enough. Stars don't withdraw from prestigious tournaments over course conditions. They grind through, they adjust, they find ways to compete even when setups don't suit their game. But what makes this situation absolutely explosive is what Rory said after withdrawing. In a media session that's already been viewed millions of times across every golf platform, Rory didn't hold back even slightly. He called Bay Hill's setup the most unreasonable he's experienced in his entire PGA Tour career. He said the course has crossed the line from challenging to unfair, and that players are being punished for quality shots in ways that make competitive golf feel meaningless. Those are nuclear words coming from someone of Rory's stature. And the fact that he said them publicly, on camera, knowing exactly how they'd be received, tells you how frustrated and angry he actually is about what's happening at this tournament. Here's what triggered Rory's withdrawal and public eruption. According to what he told reporters, the rough at Bay Hill this week is higher and thicker than anything he's seen at this event in over a decade. Even slight misses off the fairway result in lies so difficult that controlling distance and trajectory becomes nearly impossible. He described hitting what he considered quality iron shots that found the edge of the fairway by inches, only to face lies so punishing that advancing the ball onto the green felt like a coin flip rather than a skill-based execution. But the rough wasn't even his biggest complaint. The greens, according to Rory, are playing so firm and fast that balls landing on putting surfaces with proper spin and trajectory are still bouncing through into trouble. He specifically mentioned the par 3 17th hole, which underwent controversial changes last year when tournament officials removed the greenside bunker and expanded the water hazard. Rory said he hit what he considered a perfect 7-iron that landed on the front of the green, took one hop, and released straight into the water because the surface was so firm it couldn't hold a well-struck shot. That moment, that single shot on the 17th hole, was apparently what broke him. He walked off the green, told his caddy he was done, and went straight to tournament officials to inform them he was withdrawing. The frustration wasn't just about one bad break, it was about accumulating evidence throughout the round that the setup had eliminated skills, the primary factor in determining outcomes. And for a player of Rory's caliber, being told that execution doesn't matter because course conditions are too extreme is absolutely unacceptable. What makes Rory's withdrawal and criticism so damaging for the Arnold Palmer Invitational is that this isn't the first time he's raised these concerns. Back in 2022, Rory played the entire tournament and then gave a memorable post-round interview where he said he felt shell-shocked by the setup and compared weekend conditions to crazy golf where quality shots weren't being rewarded. At the time, other players including Adam Scott and Tyrrell Hatton echoed similar frustrations. Tournament officials promised to review and adjust, but 4 years later, Rory's saying the problems have gotten worse, not better. That pattern of ignored feedback is what's making this situation so explosive. Rory isn't some journeyman complaining about difficulty. He's a generational talent, a player who's won majors on some of the toughest courses in the world, someone who understands and appreciates championship-level setups. When he says a course has crossed from challenging to unfair, that carries enormous weight. And when he says he's raised these concerns before and been ignored, it suggests systematic problems with how Bay Hill is being managed. The immediate reaction from other players has been stunning and overwhelming supportive of Rory. Within hours of his withdrawal, multiple top players started speaking out publicly about Bay Hill's setup in ways they usually avoid. Scottie Scheffler, the world's #1, gave an interview where he didn't specifically criticize the course, but acknowledged that setups where quality shots aren't rewarded create frustration that affects everyone's mental approach to competition. Victor Hovland was more direct, saying in a post-round press conference that he understood Rory's frustration completely and that several holes at Bay Hill this week feel more like survival tests than golf holes. Max Homa posted on social media a cryptic message that read, "Sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime," which was immediately interpreted as supporting Rory's position without directly criticizing the tournament, but the most significant response came from Tiger Woods, who rarely comments on course setup controversies. Tiger gave an interview where he was asked about Rory's withdrawal and criticism. His response was measured but telling. He said that championship golf requires a balance between rewarding great shots and punishing mistakes, and that when that balance tips too far in either direction, the competitive integrity of the event suffers. Coming from Tiger, that's about as close to public criticism as you'll ever get, and it validates everything Rory just said. Behind the scenes, Arnold Palmer Invitational officials are reportedly in crisis mode. Emergency meetings were held within hours of Rory's withdrawal, with tournament directors, PGA Tour officials, and course superintendents trying to figure out how to respond. Multiple sources describe the atmosphere as panicked, because this isn't just one player complaining. This is the tour's biggest active star publicly withdrawing and calling out the tournament in ways that could permanently damage Bay Hill's reputation and field strength. The financial implications are significant too. The Arnold Palmer Invitational relies heavily on attracting top players to maintain its status as a premier event. Sponsors pay premium rates based on field quality and television ratings that come from having stars like Rory competing. If Rory's withdrawal and public criticism lead other top players to skip Bay Hill in future years, the tournament could face serious revenue problems and potentially lose its elevated status on the tour schedule. What makes this crisis even worse for tour officials is the timing. Next week is the Players' Championship, the tour's flagship event that's often called the fifth major. Every top player will be at TPC Sawgrass, and Rory's Bay Hill withdrawal and criticism will dominate media coverage and player conversations. Instead of focusing on the players, everyone will be debating whether Bay Hill has become unplayable and whether the PGA Tour has a broader problem with course setups that prioritize difficulty over fairness. The philosophical question at the heart of this controversy is one that professional golf has struggled with for decades. How difficult should championship courses be? Traditionalists argue that the best players in the world should be tested to their absolute limits and that tough conditions separate true champions from merely good players. But others, including Rory, argue that difficulty for its own sake isn't championship golf if it removes skill as the primary determinant of success. Rory's position is that he has no problem with difficult courses. He's won majors at brutally tough setups and thrived under pressure when conditions challenged every aspect of his game. But he draws a clear line between difficult and unfair. Difficult means you have to execute perfectly to score well. Unfair means even perfect execution doesn't guarantee good results because external conditions have become too extreme. What Rory McIlroy just did by withdrawing from the Arnold Palmer Invitational and publicly erupting about the setup isn't just about one tournament or 1 week. It's about a player with enormous influence deciding he's done accepting conditions he believes undermine competitive golf. The PGA Tour is in big trouble because if they don't address Rory's concerns seriously, they risk losing credibility with other top players who share his frustrations but haven't spoken out publicly yet. And if Bay Hill doesn't make significant changes, they could find themselves with a weakened field in future years as players decide the risk to their mental game and tournament preparation isn't worth dealing with setups they consider unreasonable. This isn't just controversy. This is a crisis that could reshape how the PGA Tour thinks about course setups for years to come. Rory McIlroy just exploded in the most dramatic, career-defining way possible, and his last-minute withdrawal from Bay Hill has sent the PGA Tour into absolute chaos. This wasn't a quiet injury announcement or a polite scheduling conflict. This was Rory standing in front of cameras hours before his tee time and detonating a nuclear bomb that's been building for years, calling out one of golf's most prestigious tournaments in ways nobody saw coming. What did Rory actually say that has Arnold Palmer Invitational officials scrambling in emergency meetings? Why are players texting each other in shock? And how did one withdrawal turn into the most explosive moment the PGA Tour has witnessed all season? Let's be brutally clear about the timeline here, because the way this unfolded makes it so much more dramatic and devastating. Wednesday afternoon, Rory McIlroy was scheduled to play his practice round at Bay Hill Club and Lodge, preparing for the Arnold Palmer Invitational like he has for us. Years. This is one of the tour's signature events, played at Arnold Palmer's home course with massive prestige and a field packed with the world's best players. Rory was expected to compete. Media had scheduled interviews. Sponsors had built marketing campaigns around his presence. Then Thursday morning, just hours before the first round was set to begin, Rory pulled out, not quietly through a press release or agent statement. He walked into a hastily arranged press conference and delivered one of the most scathing, unfiltered criticisms of a PGA Tour venue that anyone can remember. And what he said didn't just shock the golf world. It exposed years of frustration that apparently nobody knew had been building to this breaking point. Rory's opening statement set the tone immediately. He said he'd spent Wednesday afternoon walking the golf course, analyzing conditions and discussing strategy with his caddy. And the more he saw, the more convinced he became that competing this week would be damaging to his preparation for next week's Players' Championship and potentially harmful to his mental approach to golf in general. Those aren't casual words. That's Rory saying Bay Hill's setup is so problematic that playing there could actually hurt his game going forward. But he didn't stop with vague concerns about preparation. Rory got specific, detailed, and absolutely brutal in his assessment of what Bay Hill has become. He said the rough is the thickest and most punishing he's encountered at any PGA Tour event this season, describing lies where even finding the ball becomes difficult and advancing it toward the green feels more like gambling than executing shots. He said fairways have been narrowed to the point where even quality drives that miss by feet result in nearly unplayable positions. The greens were where Rory's criticism became truly explosive and impossible for tournament officials to dismiss or downplay. He said Bay Hill's putting surfaces are playing so firm and fast that balls landing with proper trajectory and spin are bouncing through into hazards and rough. He specifically called out the par 3 17th hole, which underwent controversial redesign last year when officials removed the greenside bunker and expanded the water hazard. Rory said that hole has gone from challenging to essentially unplayable for anyone trying to execute proper golf shots. His exact words, according to multiple reporters in the room, were something that immediately went viral across every golf platform. I'm not interested in playing golf, where executing quality shots gets punished the same as hitting bad ones. That's not championship golf. That's just course setup taken to an extreme that removes skill from the equation. That statement is absolutely devastating because Rory's essentially saying Bay Hill has stopped being a legitimate test of golf and become something else entirely. What makes Rory's withdrawal and eruption so shocking is that he's not some hothead known for emotional outbursts. This is Rory McIlroy, one of the most professional, measured, and respected voices in golf. He's won 4 major championships on some of the toughest courses in the world. He's thrived at brutal US Open setups and demanding Open Championship conditions. When Rory McIlroy says a course has crossed from challenging to unfair, that carries weight that can't be dismissed as whining or inability to handle difficulty. And Rory made that distinction crystal clear in his press conference. He said he has no problem with difficult golf courses and actually prefers setups that test every aspect of his game. But he drew a hard line between difficult and unfair, saying difficult means perfect execution gets rewarded while mistakes get punished. Unfair means even perfect execution can't guarantee good results because conditions have eliminated the skill component that makes golf a sport rather than chance. The immediate reaction from Bay Hill officials was defensive and uncomfortable. Tournament director announced within an hour that course conditions were designed to honor Arnold Palmer's vision of championship golf and that the setup was entirely consistent with what players should expect at this event. But that response only made things worse because it suggested officials were dismissing Rory's concerns entirely rather than taking them seriously. Behind the scenes, the situation is apparently far more chaotic than the official statement suggested. Multiple sources describe emergency meetings happening Thursday morning involving PGA Tour officials, tournament organizers, and course management trying to figure out how to contain the damage. The panic isn't just about Rory withdrawing, it's about what his public criticism could do to Bay Hill's reputation and future field strength if other top players start agreeing with him publicly. And that's exactly what started happening within hours. Other players who were scheduled to compete at Bay Hill started speaking out in ways that validated everything Rory said. Max Homa gave a pre-round interview where he was asked about Rory's withdrawal, and he didn't hold back. He said he understood Rory's frustration completely and that several players had discussed concerns about the setup during practice rounds. That's significant because Max isn't some fringe voice. He's one of the tour's most popular and respected players. Tommy Fleetwood was even more direct, saying in his press conference that he had walked the 17th hole multiple times during practice and couldn't figure out how to play it properly given the firm greens and expanded water hazard. He stopped short of withdrawing himself, but made it clear he shared Rory's concerns about whether the whole setup was fair. When multiple tour stars start echoing the same criticisms publicly, it becomes impossible to dismiss as one player having a bad attitude. But the most significant response came from players who aren't even at base. Hill this week. Scottie Scheffler, the world's #1 who's preparing for next week's Players' Championship, was asked about Rory's withdrawal during a sponsor appearance. His response was diplomatic but clearly supportive. He said every player has to make decisions about which events serve their preparation best, and that if Rory felt Bay Hill's conditions weren't productive for his game, withdrawing was the professional choice. That might sound like neutral commentary, but in golf's culture of never publicly criticizing tournaments, Scottie refusing to defend Bay Hill's setup speaks volumes. He easily could have said Rory was wrong, or that championship golf requires tough conditions. Instead, he essentially validated Rory's decision, which signals that top players privately share concerns they're not willing to voice as loudly. Social media absolutely exploded with reactions split almost perfectly down the middle. Half the golf world praised Rory for having the courage to call out unfair setups and stand up for what he believes championship golf should be. The other half destroyed him as a diva who can't handle difficult conditions and threw a tantrum instead of competing. The discourse became toxic within hours, with both sides accusing the other of not understanding what makes golf great. What's getting lost in the debate is the broader question Rory's withdrawal raises about PGA Tour course setups in general. Bay Hill isn't the only tournament where players have privately complained about conditions going too far. US Open setups have faced similar criticism. Certain tour stops are known for pushing boundaries in ways that make players uncomfortable. Rory's public stand might force the tour to have uncomfortable conversations about where the line between challenging and unfair actually sits. The financial implications for the Arnold Palmer Invitational are potentially massive and long-lasting. Sponsors pay premium rates based on field strength and stars. Power. If Rory's withdrawal and public criticism lead other top players to skip Bay Hill in future years, the tournament faces serious revenue problems. Television ratings depend on marquee names competing. If stars start avoiding the event because they share Rory's concerns about setup, broadcast partners will demand lower fees. Tournament officials have to be asked